every day of my life, I find myself answering questions about Jack, thinking about Jack, talking about Jack. And if you ever met Jack, you know, he had a very odd way of speaking. His mind would race from topic to topic to topic. He would start talking about one thing, and suddenly he'd be talking about another thing, and he'd talk about another thing. And he put strange associations together. He would make leaps in his logic. You know, most people, their minds go from A to B to C to D. Jack would start with A, and then he'd do R, and then he'd do K, and all of a sudden he'd have you on beyond zebra someplace, which is, his mind would just, and a lot of the great concepts he came up with in comics, I believe, were a case of him putting together two things that no one else would ever have thought to put together and make into one coherent, better idea that was better than any of the components. So we do these panels to talk about that, talk about Jack. Let me introduce the panel, the dais as it stands thus far. This is a chair which will be occupied by Neal Adams at some point, I presume. This is the fine illustrator, Mr. Darwyn Cook. This is the fine writer, Mr. Len Wein. These are the fine writers and playwrights, Crystal Skillman and Fred Van Lente. This is the fine attorney, Paul Levin. Paul is here because I never went anywhere without my lawyer. He's also the lawyer for, now what's the exact name of it again?
The Rosalind Kirby Trust.
The Rosalind, when people say the Kirby estate, they probably mean the Rosalind Kirby Trust, which Paul has represented for these many years. How long have you been in?
Represented Jack from 81 until 87, and then when I went solo in 92, represented him in the estate.
I read into, what's his first name, Viktorov. And you're an old law partner person thing. Yes. I'll talk about that later. Anyway, one of the topics we're not going to be talking about here, because there isn't much to say about it, is that, as you may know, the Jack Kirby estate, i.e. the Rosalind Kirby Trust and such, there was this dispute between the Marvel Comics people and the Kirbys, which in various forms and various shapes went on since about the day I met Jack, which was in July of 1969. And for all that time, I felt that Jack was not properly compensated for his work. He was not properly credited for his work, and I was not the only person who felt this. And so far as I could tell, every single person who really knew the history of Marvel Comics and knew what Jack had done felt this way. And finally, it was resolved with a very nice settlement, a very nice coda. And I cannot tell you the relief I have felt to have closure on something which has been gnawing at me since July of 1969. So,
can I ask you, Mark?
Yeah?
To what degree do you think the settlement hinged on Disney's purchase of Marvel? Do you think that was a big part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was definitely. Anyway, we're not going to talk much about that. We're going to talk about Jack a bit. I was hoping Neal would be here so I could start with my main thesis. But before we get to that, I want to ask each of the people in the panel to tell us a little bit about things they've done that have touched on Jack Kirby. Fred, you did a project recently. Tell us about, you and Crystal did a project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. We did a...
And get a little closer to the mic.
Yeah, no problem.
If at any point in the audience you can't hear, wave to me and I'll try to get them to speak louder and closer.
I primarily write comics for a living, and so I've always been interested in comics, but before I even really broke into the industry, I became really interested in Jack's life, and was sort of researching a biography of him just really as a hobby more than anything else. This would be like 1999, 2000, and I was dating this lovely lady here, Crystal, at the time. We subsequently got married. I'm sure that's not a coincidence. But she was a playwright, and so I just sort of as a monkey see, monkey do thing, adapted my research on Jack as a play. And we did a reading of it, it was fun, and we kind of put it away and kind of sat in a drawer for a while until theater that Crystal, well, why don't you take it from there? There's a theater you were involved in New York, and they did something kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a big movement in theater. Sometimes it's called geek theater or comic book theater, and it's not just New York, it's kind of all over, which is really exciting. And we naturally see the two communities speaking to each other. So in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, they have a great festival at a theater called Brick Theater. It's called the Comic Book Theater Festival. And so they were fans of the idea of the play, very excited by it, and we've done some rewrites, so we were excited to put up the play there. And it was a really exciting experience to share the story and to share, this incredible man's life in this festival. But to both, like 50% of the audience that really knew him quite well or of him or was very excited to see this on stage, or those who were experiencing the story for the first time. And it was cool to see how gratified audiences were on both sides.
Our audience in the play was a neat mixture of comics, cute people, and play people, and all that. It's called King Kirby.
And tell us, is it now it ran for how long?
It ran in June. We got some very nice New York Times review, and it's going to be in Seattle and I think in Calgary next year, which is super exciting. So, and hopefully we'll come to well.
When you were casting the role of Jack Kirby, what did you look for?
Mean guy with a cigar. Jack is a very physical type, particularly in the way he's been portrayed in pop culture, even subsequent to his death. We needed someone who was tough, I think. It's also sort of how he came across. And there was one person that we kind of gravitated to, and we were lucky that we got him.
Right, it was in my mind. I worked with him 2 years ago on a play of mine, Stephen Rattazzi.
Are you guys here Venture Brothers fans? He plays Dr. Orpheus.
Yes. And he's an incredible, and because I've been in the room with him, because I know he worked with incredible players like my friend David Adjby, who plays at Lincoln Center, and Taylor Mack, who plays at Republic. I knew the breadth of his work, I knew how he worked in the room, and I knew that he could really transform into any character, but also really have soul, heightened poetry, of what I feel like the essence of capturing Jack on stage. And we were just so lucky that he was so taken with the project. He works mostly off-Broadway and Broadway, so he came on down to Williamsburg, which was very exciting, and he did a wonderful job. There's actually also a radio version of it as well, so you can, or it wasn't a radio version, but it's
The Midtown Comics podcast, so you go on their iTunes stream.
So you can actually hear that for free. You can actually hear it.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the last part of that. Did your actor look at videos of Jack?
He did. He was very, he's a classical trained actor who wanted to make the role his own. We definitely sent videos and audio. We definitely want to make the characters own. I think he did a very good job of capturing the essence of Jack.
And also playing against.
Based on what we did.
I think too, he really did a great job of showing us some vulnerability in places that you would be surprised by, but in moments where he had to kind of rise up, that's where you saw kind of the classical idea of him. Because a lot of what we wanted to capture in the play too was his struggle through his work, but also with how he was being talked about and how he was being seen as well in perception. So we wanted to make sure that the character was very clear.
I know you can't tell the whole play to us here in this thing, but give people a little summary here of there were many stories you could tell about Jack. What was the story you decided to tell about him? What was roughly the beginning, middle, and end of this dramatic arc?
Well, I mean, I think there's two things. One of which is just sort of the bare facts of Jack's life, or this amazing story, this amazing 20th century story, because so much of his life touches not just on comics history, but him growing up on the Lower East Side, his World War II experiences, him coming out here to California in the late 60s, and so it's such a great kind of American story. We wanted to touch on that. But the main thing that I think that we were most interested in is, I think all of us at this table who are involved in pop culture know, out there, a lot of people don't understand that pop culture comes from people. Like, humans create this. It doesn't,
Or how it's created.
so Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, or whatever don't just suddenly bubble up, look like the head of Zeus, and just kind of exist then on the magazine stands and the movies. So what we really want to do is give that impression that to make people understand the human beings behind these big four-color cultural icons.
And so now, I mean, without giving away the ending, what was the ending? How far did you take this? How far did you take this?
He died, spoiler alert, at the end of the show, but then we have him sort of,
Well, it's
there was a
actually
big, there was a big Southers, well, right, thank you,
We
yeah.
start at Sotheby's, and we start with the auction, and we start with him, of course, working, because he would never stop working. So as the audience enters, they actually see Stephen Rattazzi as Jack, drawing and drawing and drawing. But some people were some people even very young, which was very interesting, had written their thesis on him and were crying. Because just to see someone who looked like him, working like him, and the show hadn't even started yet was just very emotional, I think. And then the play kind of starts around him. They start auctioning off his work, and he starts saying, I don't want to hear the value after I'm gone. And we realized that this is him taking control of his life and telling us, and we were able to land in different scenes for that. We return to that last moment of the play, and in that last moment, he goes back to a character, to Emerson, this coming back to some of the space stories he loved to tell, and he takes out a piece of chalk from his pocket, how he used to draw on the streets, and then he just starts drawing again, but without the drawing table, just
On the stage.
And the lights fade on that.
Sotheby's is now selling some of those sidewalks.
Can I just side note this? Speaking of how pervasive his influence is, on April 20 in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, they're premiering a short film called Artie, made by a friend of mine, and it's based on Jack's life. It's all about Jack and what he went through in the early years of his career. And it's a remarkable movie. No one here in the States would know anything about. I got to see a screening of it about a month ago. So, all over the world, there are people who've, connected to this guy. And filmmakers, documentarians, playwrights are all fascinated by his spirit and what he brings to it. So if you are in Halifax on April 20th, go catch the premiere party.
Now in the room, we've been joined by Mr. Neal Adams, ladies and gentlemen. Now that Neal's here, can I say something? Okay.
I just want you guys to know that I'm the luckiest guy in the room because I'm doing a Superman New Gods story for DC Comics. Jack Kirby's New Gods. Nobody else.
All right, the topic I would like to discuss here, there's many aspects that Jeff discussed. I want to discuss something here. Over the years, I would occasionally meet people who would say, oh, I love Jack Kirby, but I like the way John Buscema drew the Silver Surfer more. Or I love Jack Kirby's work, but I like the way Walt Simonson did Thor more. Which is fun. And that kind of thing never bothered Jack. Over the years, when he heard that somebody liked another artist more than his work, he was really non-competitive. The thing, though, that I think a lot of people never got about Jack was that Jack wasn't really competitive with most other comic book artists because in his mind, they had a different job description. When John Buscema sat down to draw an issue of Fantastic Four, and absolutely nothing I'm about to say is knocking John Buscema in any way, or any of the artists that we mentioned here, his goal was to do a good issue of the Fantastic Four. When Jack sat down to do an issue of Fantastic Four, in his mind, his job description was to create a new universe and 3 spin-offs and take comics to another level. There are people in the industry who come into comics and they write wonderful stories, they draw wonderful stories, they draw lovely pictures, but when they leave that project, it's just that project. It is just X number of good issues of that comic, and they move on to the thing, and the people who come after them go back to the source material, but there isn't really a continuity there. And then there are also creators and people who, when they've done a comic, they are always out to change comics a little bit with every job. And we're always out to come up with some new format or new idea. And I thought we have Neal here who's an example. It's a very small list of people who, when they did a comic, they changed the business a little bit with every project they did, generally for the better. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Jack's influence in this respect. Now, Neal, you are aware, I'm sure, that you know, your Batman stories, to take one example, were very nice Batman stories, but they were not only self-contained. The good stuff in there was not contained just to your particular issues. You changed the character in Batman, you changed it in other books.
See, you're talking about me, okay?
Okay,
I want to talk about Jack.
Okay, then
I want to talk about Jack.
I want to talk about...
Listen to me, listen to this.
All right.
Do you guys have...
Okay, here's what the panel's going to be about, in spite of what I want.
Did you guys have a Stan Lee in your show?
Oh, sure.
And a Joe Simon?
Yes.
Was he really tall?
Taller than Jack. Only the guy
Joe Simon was taller than anybody in the room. He was like a sailing ship walking through things like that. My thing with Jack and observing Jack and watching his career is I imagine poor Stan Lee, okay, picking up pages from Jack and going, Asgard. Do I have to know all the gods of Asgard? And having to go to the library and take out books that for Jack was like second conversation. He's like, yeah, but don't you know about this? Don't you know about this? What about, alternate universes and warps and all the rest of this stuff? And Stan would have to go and research this stuff just so he could dialogue Jack's stuff. Because Jack was ahead of everybody. You couldn't run to catch up to Jack. You didn't know where the hell he was going. He went to DC Comics and he created new gods. Excuse me. Who would ever think new gods? I mean, he was dealing with old gods. Nobody caught up to him at Marvel doing the old gods, and suddenly he's at DC Comics doing new gods. New gods? Really? There's no holy Jesus. What the heck is going on? And then he does it. He creates these new gods, and he creates these worlds, and you go, dark world, where is this world? It can't be in the solar system. Jack, help us! And it's like, you don't know what to do with this stuff because he does it all the time. Then he'll read a comic book and there'll be a double-page spread that he puts together like a Mechanics Illustrated thing of pasted stuff that he cut out from magazines. And the rest of us sit back and go, oh my God, I can't do that. What? And poor Stan would go, and here's Jack's view of this universe. Enough said. Because he didn't know what to say. Or he'd go, Excelsior! And they'd walk away. Stan, did you get paid for those 2 pages? I don't get it. Because he didn't know what to say, what to do with it, because Jack was so incredible. And you have to understand that when you draw comic books, you're drawing comic books all the time. Where did he get this time? Where did that damn little guy, chomping on that cigar, Roz taking care of him, letting fans into his house and eating his food and treating them like angels, and then they go out shocked that Jack Kirby and Roz were so wonderful. Where did he have time to research this stuff? He knew more than anybody. Believe me, I'm a very knowledgeable person. I know shit. I'm telling you, I know stuff, okay? If a conversation with Jack, you talk about, any subject, he knew more than you knew. And he was putting it in the comic books. Unbelievable. And here he's dealing with regular humans, What? Yeah, you put the warps together like this and you can jump from here to here. Really? Didn't you read that? It was in Scientific Illustrated. Oh, no, I didn't, Jack. Gotta read that. Poor Stan. Imagine Stan. Stan is not what you call a tremendously educated person. There's no offense. But I'm just saying, he's gotta crack the books every night, every time he gets a Jack Kirby story. Asgard, he knows all the characters in Asgard. Every one of them. Every single one of them. This is a genius. I'm just saying, okay? That little guy behind that desk with that cigar, chomping that cigar, was a genius. He set our business up. We all followed him. Anybody get ahead of Jack Kirby? Nobody. Nobody. We're still running to catch up.
You're all holding mother boxes in your hand now, 50 years later.
That's right. That's right. I'm sorry.
Neal,
No,
Neal, Since you were around the DC offices at the time, could you tell us a little bit about what was going on up there when Jack would mail in those stories, those early New God stories? Because I sure got the feeling that some of those people there just didn't get it.
I can tell you, Carmen Infantino didn't get it.
My first time up at the DC offices, Saul Harrison sat me down, and I was Jack's assistant for about an hour and a half at that point. He said, "You got to talk to Jack about not drawing square fingertips. He's got to look at Kurt Swan's work and draw more like him." And I thought, yeah, that's going to happen.
I can tell you that my experience up in DC Comics was to save as much as possible all the crap that the editorial was doing to Jack's work. Because they would get, who's that guy who used to draw Superman but did
Al Plastino.
Al Plastino. Believe me, a great guy. A wonderful guy. But he drew Kurt Swan's Superman softer. Jack's stuff was harder than Kurt Swan, easily, harder than anybody's. And so Al Plastino would do these heads that Carmen Infantino, look at. I love Carmen Infantino, I gotta tell you. But he was a functioning illiterate. I'm sorry. Just saying, okay? And he knew his own stuff. I'm sorry, I apologize, okay? But he knew his own stuff, and he didn't understand Jack at all, okay? So putting Al Plastino on Superman heads on Jack Kirby made no sense in the world. So I would run into Carmine's office and say, "Carmine, look, I'll do the heads. Whatever patches you have to do, let me do the patches and let the fans get mad at me, but this is ridiculous." So that's what I did. And I apologize for doing it, but I did it to save the work. I didn't do it because I have a big ego. I did it because they wanted that stuff changed. Square fingers. Of course people have square fingers in Jack Kirby's universe. Only Joe Sinnott softened up the fingers and made them neat and pretty. But it didn't matter. When you read Jack's stuff, it was Jack. It was wonderful. So really, Jack went from Stan, who actually loved Jack and loved his work. You have to admit, Stan Lee will always say wonderful things about Jack. And he went
under oath.
Except under fine. Except under oath, and I'll go with that. But still, on a personal basis, we know what happened. Jack was sending this stuff and wrote the notes on the side of the pages, and Stan would go research it. Because he had to research it, otherwise he wouldn't know what the hell's going on. And then he went over to DC Comics, and they had no idea. He went over to DC Comics because he was told he would be treated better. He wasn't treated better. He was ignored, and he handled badly. I'm going to tell you a Jack Kirby story. Okay, I apologize. If I'm monopolizing this, I apologize. Okay. Jack finally said, "Enough with this crap." And he went out to Hollywood. He said, "I'm going out to Hollywood. This is going to do stuff. I'm going to do stuff." He calls me on the phone, and he says, "Neal, there's these kids calling me. They want to publish my characters. And they said they'll pay me whatever DC Comics pays me and whatever Marvel pays me, and they'll let me keep the rights to my characters." What is this bullshit? Jack, who are these kids? Pacific Comics. They call themselves Pacific Comics. I said, "Jack, try to understand this, okay? I'm going to explain this very slowly to you. Everybody in the world thinks that you're rich. Everybody in the world thinks you get paid $1,000 a page, and they'll never be able to use you. If you admit what you get paid at DC and Marvel, fans and fan publishers would faint. Double your price. Go back to these people and say, 'Fine, I want to keep my characters.' And what they will do, Jack, is let you keep your characters. And then they will pay you the money you ask. More than what DC Comics will pay." "Neal, they won't do that. That's bullshit." "Oh, Jack, I swear to God, they will do it. They will let you keep the rights to your characters, and they will pay you better than DC and Marvel ever paid you, because they really respect you." You sure about this? I promise you, Jack. I promise you. Sure enough, he did Captain Victory for Pacific Comics, and it worked. Then, 2 days later, I got a call from Sergio Aragonés, who said the same thing. Neal, these people crazy. No, they'll let you. That's how Sergio Aragonés says grew the Barbarian. Still. Because people outside of the industry think so much of Jack and so much of guys like Sergio that they can't believe that they were treated so badly in the industry. And they were, and you know what? See that those muscles that tighten around Jack's jaw while he clamps down on that cigar? Jack had the ability to bite down, dig in, turn out his 4 to 6 pages a day. Best man in the business. Sorry, did I wander?
No, that's
Sorry.
That's for Len. Len, let's follow up. You were around the DC offices back when Jack's You Got Stuff and Berkeley were coming in.
Yes.
What did you see going on in the offices vis-a-vis Jack's work?
Tragically, the same thing Neal saw. I mean, the fact that they would look at it, this extraordinary stuff, and not see the vision, but see the tiny little things that weren't to their satisfaction. I was amazed by that. They always said, you know, it's the house style. If you wanted the house style, why in God's name did you hire a man who invented style? And they would just go on making those little niddly corrections. It would drive everyone who knew what we were seeing tampered with crazy.
There was a tendency at DC at that time to put what Mr. Harris called the DC touch in every book. I felt like I had to touch everyone that came in and do something to it in the office to enhance it or take credit for something or whatever. And Jack had a few allies up there. Neal was one. Another person who does not get credit, who helped save a lot of Jack's stuff, was a guy who at the time at DC Comics was probably the smartest person in the building, a man named Nelson Bridwell.
Nelson Bridwell.
Who was a very brilliant man who was treated an awful lot like Mel Cooley, if you know who that was. But he was frequently the smartest guy in the place, catching mistakes other people made, and he had a genuine love for comics that transcended any corporate considerations. And he did a lot to save things and to complain about inkers and things of that sort.
Nelson Bridwell.
That's right.
Wrote a translation of Hamlet, an upgraded translation of Hamlet, and gave all the definitions of the words, and it was the best translation I've ever read in my life. And he studied it, and he could do it and just knocked it out.
So my whole life we thought his name was Bridwell.
Yeah, Bridwell. Nelson Bridwell.
And again, it was all about appearance to DC. They treated him incredibly poorly because he was not a terribly attractive man. He had some physical quirks, but he was brilliant.
Right.
You know, I think
He was one of those people you'd go to if you wanted to know anything. You'd go to Nelson.
Yeah.
Tell you.
He would spend afternoons in his later days in my office just to talk to somebody who would talk back to him.
Right. And he was a big defender of Jack Kirby stuff. And then if you study Jack's stuff at DC Comics, just like Marvel, you'll discover that he had the greatest ideas, the most expressive, the most interesting, the most advanced ideas in comic books, and all the rest of the industry is feeding off of it. And every time people try to go and do Jack Kirby stuff, they fail at DC. And you scratch your head and say, why don't they get it? They don't do it because they keep on doing their own version of what Jack did instead of what Jack did. If they would just take it and do Jack and make it, draw it better, don't put square tips on the fingers, fine. But draw what Jack did, it would be better. And that's what Jack left to us. He left the challenge. It's sort of like, Star Wars. They did Star Wars, and then everybody tried to do science fiction movies, and they stumbled, and finally they got it, and now we're doing good science fiction epic adventure plays on film. But it took a good 10 years, a good decade to catch up to Star Wars. And I don't know if anybody was here when Star Wars came out, but it was like we just leapt ahead. You know, that's like what Jack Kirby did. He just shot out of the barrel and did all this stuff. And we're still trying to catch up. I'm working on doing what he did, and I'm like, how do I catch up to all this stuff? You know, I can't jam all this shit into panels. There's so much to do, so many incredible powers and concepts, and you know, the boom tube, you know, it's a teleportation device. Hey, it's much better than Star Trek. It's great, you know, you go in one end, you come out the other end, only it's somewhere else, and you change space in between. What a great idea. And why not make it a tube? Of course it's a tube. That's the way to do it. I mean, he did all these ideas, the cubes and all that rest of that stuff. There is nobody like Jack Kirby. There will never be anybody like Jack Kirby, and we are lucky if we get anywhere near catching up to him, and that's really what it's all about. Jack was the best, and at DC they didn't recognize it. And you know what? His family got a lot of money recently.
I want to ask Darwyn and then Fred. First, Darwyn, you came into comics a lot later than that. Are you aware, you had these stories about how comics used to be. Are you horrified by this? Do you believe it? Do you understand it? Are you thankful that you didn't work in that era? How do you react to all these stories of how artists you admire, writers you admire were treated?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that before I'd gotten into comics, I'd worked in the music industry, the fashion industry, and advertising. So, of course, I believed it. Comics people live in a sort of wonderful, reality of their own, where they believe the world's a better place, I think, than it is. So, as mortified as we might be by the treatment of guys like Jack, it's a pretty commonplace experience outside of comics as well. So coming into it later, you know, being 36, when I actually finally got something going in business, I had a very healthy dose of what the world had to offer creators. So yeah, I found it very easy to believe. And no less tragic, but no less infuriating. But yeah, I unfortunately I had enough life experience to see that this was, in a lot of ways, no different than any other field you might be in.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, my consciousness of the comics industry was in the mid-'80s when Jack was fighting to get his artwork back from Marvel, and that whole battle was something I was aware of just reading the fan press. And so, you know, I think my generation is very fortunate. A lot of us are doing image and create our own stuff. A lot of that is as a direct result of that struggle and what came out of that politically in the comics industry in the '80s. So it's yet another reason we're grateful.
There's one other thing I'd add. I have a lot of the younger people in the business come up to me and they'll have had something happen to them. Their editor's done something or the publisher's pulled a stunt, and they're outraged. They're outraged at the way they've been treated. And I look at them and I go, are you a fucking idiot? Do you have any sense of history? Look, if they're going to do it to Jack Kirby, who are you? What is it about you that made you think that you were going to be treated better than the greatest man the industry's ever seen? They treated him horribly. So, you know, proportionately, look at your place, and of course they're going to treat you badly. You know, why are you surprised? You know, have a sense of history and an understanding in the industry you're in.
One of my biggest regrets is that I wasn't born about 30 years earlier, because I only started representing Jack in '81, starting with trying to get his artwork back from Marvel, etc. And I only wish that I had represented him back in the day. Who knows what could have been if he was properly represented way back when.
Well, there's a very good chance back then they wouldn't have talked to you. You know, there were times in the history of the industry where they just said, we do not deal with lawyers, we only talk to the artists. We won't give them copies of the contracts they sign. There's a couple of really ugly stories like that. And Jack, when he left Marvel in '69, that was essentially really bad. They said, we're not going to talk to your lawyer. You sign that contract we sent you or get out. And the lawyer kept calling him saying, you know, I represent Mr. Kirby, I want to discuss this contract. He said, we don't talk to lawyers. I'm up on it. So, which is not the way business should be done in any part of this country, and ever, at any time.
Well, lawyers.
Can you imagine a world without lawyers?
We actually have at least 2 lawyers in the room at the moment.
I'm going to get sued.
Two
No, we can see the dark clouds.
two creator-friendly ones.
Yes.
So, Len,
Greg,
yes, sir. Len, I know you've told these stories before, but some of these people haven't heard them. Tell us a little bit about going to Jack's house.
It was like going to Candyland. We were, Marv Wolfman and I were very fortunate as kids, and I mean as kids, you know, pre-teen kids in the started.
Jerks. I'm telling you.
What's changed in 50 years?
Precocious jerks.
You guys work pretty good together, so
We do. We actually have in the past.
you did a book or
And
two.
maybe we'll move again in the future. No, I mean, the late Mike Sikowski lived next to my aunt Doris, and this is before there was a comics fan, before conventions, before any of you would ever have gotten together for any reason. And she said, you know, my nephew was a big comic fan, can you come over and say hi? And Mike was very gracious, and said, sure. And then he realized that we were going to be leeches because we found professional comic people. So he introduced us to, I believe it was Joe Giella, who in turn was wonderful to us, but he introduced us to Frank Giacoya, and Frank, who was, at that point, Jack's, wasn't he related to Jack? Was Jack's brother?
No,
I used to live there, it was close enough in those days.
Jewish Italian.
And Frank introduced us to Jack, and we called up and said we were fans.
To get rid of it.
Of course, they all did, until we got to Jack.
Same.
Absolutely, but until we got to Jack, and we were invited over to Jack's house, and the place is astonishing. That several of those breathtaking 2-page spreads from Boys Ranch were on the walls, hand painted by, hand colored by Jack, and they treated us like family, not like annoyances. We come over at least once a month on a Saturday and watch Jack work, just to watch Jack work, because that's magic.
Let's talk about Roz for a minute.
Well, I was about to. You want to direct this or shall I?
He's been directed.
It's a bit of a drag.
Roz would treat us like we were kids. We'd sit on the floor, cross-legged, watching Jack work. She'd come down and bring us milk and cookies, and was there anything else we could do? And they were the most remarkable family. You could tell how much they loved each other. It was great. I mean, we became lifelong friends. I mean, Chris and I were at their 50th wedding anniversary. Got to watch them dance together. It was wonderful. And everybody else said, oh God, pests. Jack wanted to know what we thought. When we're kids, we're 13, 14 years old at this point. What do you think about what's going on? What's important in the world? He's always looking for information. He was always trying to find new focus and things to work on. And I get to carry to my grave the fact that I was Jack Kirby's friend, not just fan.
And when Jack and Roz had the 50th wedding anniversary, they decided to get married again. It was a big party, wonderful little party, and Jack had been undergoing a lot of medical treatments at that time. He was not in good shape. He was very weak. He was like the kind of weak people are after chemotherapy, kind of knocked out. And we're at this party, and Jack was, dressed in a nice suit. He takes me aside and he says, I have to sign some papers later. Just in case, can you still do my signature? Yeah. And it wasn't necessary. But he gets up there and the rabbi says, to Roz, do you take this man? And Roz does one of these, I'm thinking it over. Right? It was very well. Those two people fit together so well. And we owe a debt of gratitude to Roz for making everything Jack did possible. Because Jack couldn't have found his way to the drawing table some mornings probably without Roz shoving him there. And the most important thing she would do is she would wake up like at 4 in the morning and realize Jack had not joined her bed. And she'd go out and say, Jack, you got to come in and go to bed. And he'd go, wait a minute, 2 more panels, just 2 more panels. She'd drag him to bed. And every time she'd make him go outside for air that he had not, just get some fresh air that was not fouled with cigar smoke. To get back to my original thesis here for a few minutes here, I always felt that there were guys in comics who did stuff that had a lasting effect, and there were guys in comics who just did stuff that were nice issues. And Neal Adams, whether he wants to be modest about this or not, was a guy who did comics that had a lasting effect, that changed, there's influence in other people's work. And one of the main things he did up at DC was he forced them as much as possible, and I'm sure he'll admit he was not wholly successful, to live in the current century and do business better ways, and to do printing better ways, and respect the work more.
For those who weren't there, in the 70s, Neal was the conscience of DC Comics, plain and simple, period.
Yeah, he's the guy who got them to stop tearing up original art.
Talk about Jack.
Yes, we will talk about Jack.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story.
You can't tell the story unless you have a microphone in front of you.
I can tell the story. You guys hear me? Yes. You heard me before, right? Okay.
Better now.
Okay. This is not all altruism on my part. Somebody may have heard this story. I'm 23 years old. I'm in Chicago. We go by an alley. We don't have alleys in New York because the buildings are too close together. And we have alleys in Chicago. Go by an alley and I see one of those exit lights. On this guy, there's a guy with a big, long coat, a slouch hat. Goes like this. So I go down the alley. I was raised in Brooklyn. You don't avoid an alley. It could be anything. It could be money. Just saying. Go down the alley. Right? It's true. Could be a gun. I'm saying. Go down the alley. Guy goes closer. I'm looking at him. I can't see him. I can see his eyes. They're like reflecting the red lights. Weird. He says, listen, this is the deal. You're in the comic book industry now, you know what you do. You have to take care of everybody. You have to take care of originals being returned. You have to get royalties for everybody. You have to take care of all the artists as they get getting older. You have to take care of Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster. You have to take care of everybody the rest of your life. And this is the deal. You can keep your hair. I said, deal! Wouldn't you take that deal? Anybody would take that deal. So don't go thinking I did this for altruistic reasons. So just to keep that. Just saying. That's your answer.
Thank you. I'm happy to get over that topic. I want to mention something that you probably are all aware. There's a thing called the Jack Kirby, what's the title about? Jack Kirby Museum and Research Center. And the two gentlemen who run this thing wonderfully are in the audience, Mr. Rand Hopkins and Tom Pratt. This year?
We do, 8:41.
8:41. There's an hour after this convention, after we get out of this panel.
Come
Right
on,
down to
it's a
8:41. Look at Jack Kirby t-shirts and things like that. These gentlemen are selflessly promoting the history of Jack and recording it and digitizing everything that can be digitized. And they're a wonderful resource about Jack, because there's a lot of us out there who are trying to keep his name alive. And it's not that difficult these days because it seems to be happening magically anywhere. Before we go here, I want to ask Crystal, when you came to this subject, did you know Jack before? Where did you learn about Jack?
It's a kind of interesting way in, because it actually wasn't from so much. I, of course, known his artwork, but I hadn't known so much about Kirby. It was actually watching the Superman animated series, and there was a character who was drawn to look like Jack Kirby. Yeah.
I wasn't on the show.
Oh, yes, right. Well, kismet. And I was like, Fred, who is? And then I would watch the episode that was dedicated to him. And that's when I first asked. I said, who is Jack Kirby? So Fred started telling me. And
Let
then,
me tell you a tale.
and then it was shortly after that he started writing the play. And the play originally, and I think it's kind of neat how it came from being a play to a comic to a play in the sense that Fred worked on the drafts of this play. It was a little bit more about the fantasy lives that Jack was creating. And the story of Jack was kind of hidden in there. And I was like, I think this is the story, you know, is it following that and that beautiful, him working so hard and what that is for an audience. What is this genius? You know, I think it would really captivate an audience. And so he was working on drafts of that, but he ended up putting a lot of it in comic book comics.
Yeah, I did a book for IDW called The Comic Book History of Comics. A lot of that research ended up there and straight up nonfiction.
And then that was wonderfully paneled out, and that story was getting so riveting that we used and kind of looked at a lot of that when coming back to the play. So, you know, it was from a little bit from Fred's version of history with it, from me getting excited about who is this guy, from me being like, oh my God, these are all the images that I thought were brilliant and incredible and amazing. You know, to the point where, you know, next to Kismet at that time, we were just in Mexico, and there's this incredible mural that just so much of it also reminded me of Jack's work. You know, Jack's work at the time was just speaking to the world and to culture, you know, as well. There's so much visionary stuff in there. So when Fred said, when we worked on the play this time around, it's about who is behind the work, who's creating it. I got so excited to dive more into it. I would say the thing that was the most exciting for me recently comes back to Roz, because I feel like in getting to go deeper into the play, I felt like, you know, the audience in a way is her, because they're they're getting to know Jack and they kind of go on this journey. And so I really love. She's such a strong woman character, a strong woman in life, and so inspirational. So.
By the way, one of the greatest scenes in the animated cartoon, Darkseid's minions are firing on the Metropolis cops, and Turpin's pinned behind the car, and all of a sudden it's Jack, and he jumps up and he goes, Coletta, Giacoya, Royer, cover me.
And Coletta erased all the attackers. Thank you for coming to this. Would you thank Mr. Neal Adams?